Today we are talking to Uncle Javed in his beautiful cozy room full of warm books. And thank you for letting us come to your room,
You're welcome.
house, and putting it all upside down to do this setup.
Yeah.
But can you tell us something about yourself, starting from your very childhood?
Right. Starting from my very childhood, which goes back, I've got memories which normally old people don't have of younger days. I can remember a lot of things of India, where I was for first 5 years of my life, between 1945 and 1950, and the things which I still remember vividly are my school, the classes, the lunch times, the procession in the streets because of the independence movement, the agitation in 1950, which made us run from Calcutta to Dhaka for safety, and the things in my house, my favorite toys, my radio, watching processions in the street, the food in the street. These are things which I remember very vividly. And sometimes my siblings argue with me saying, no, it didn't happen that way. And I said, no, it did happen that way. And they said, you're too young to remember. I said, no, I still remember them. And these are the sort of things which have etched, which are etched in my memories. And I think because of those memories, I still have a great affinity with that life in India, which I had. I mean, even though we have left India since 1950, uh, I cannot call myself 100% Pakistani. I'm still Indian to the cause or to the root of it. And this is what my siblings don't understand because they were all born in Pakistan. They say, how can you be Indian? You're Pakistani like us. I said, no, I'm Indian also. So these are the sort of things which have changed me a lot later in the life when I came to Australia. My roots being an Indian, raised in Pakistan and in a new culture of Australia. So it made me decide what I want to be in future, and that's what I did.
Is it just what you want to be, or also who you are, or who you want,
Ah,
like as a person?
yes, in those days, yes, it was what I want to be in future, and that future is now what I'm now. So I've been here 50 years, so in that 50 years, I have changed a lot, and that's what people still question. Oh, you're not a Pakistani. You don't think like a Pakistani. You don't act like Pakistani. I said, well, I'm not a Pakistani. I'm Australian, but I still have got those two great influences in my life of being born in India and lived in India and then lived in Pakistan and finished my education in Pakistan, which gave me the skills to migrate to Australia. And that's what it is. So it's a whole compromise of cultures, three cultures, and of course the three different philosophies of those three countries, which has changed me in what I am now.
Just sticking to your childhood and that time in India and Pakistan and now Bangladesh history
Yeah.
is quite a challenging time. But say you talked about remembering all those chants and either the freedom movement
Yeah.
or the separation movement
Yeah.
or the building of a new nation.
Mm.
Now, do you think that part built a lot of your personality, or did you grow up with stories about fighting for yourself? Or like it was like I think our second generation is
Totally.
totally
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, no, those things made an impression on me in a sense that they were big things for a little boy. Because when you see 1,000 people going past your window, all shouting slogans, and you would know whether they are pro-India slogans or anti-Pakistani slogans or whatever, or anti-Muslim slogans, then of course it sort of brought some fear in me about these things. I was not comfortable with them, but these are the ones they have made impression on me that way. But then again, all those fightings going back, let's say in the next 25 or 30 years, all those infighting, all those separation movement, all those anti-Hindu, anti-Muslim sentiments, in the end work out to be nothing really, because in a sense people have to go on living and they can't just thrive on hatred. They have to live together, and in the end they do in the end, they do live together. That Pakistani bit about fleeing from Calcutta to Dhaka. We never thought we were going to leave India. We just say, look, let's lock the house. Dhaka is only 200 kilometers away. We'll go there for safety, and when things have calmed down in Calcutta, we'll come back. And we just locked the house with the clothes on our back, and we just moved overnight to Dhaka. And fortunately or unfortunately, I can't say now, we never had chance to go back again until I went back in 2000, the 50 years after I left Calcutta. So those things have changed me, because that wasn't a life of ease after we moved to Pakistan. We were very comfortable in India, but for the first 5 years of Pakistan was again a struggle for all of us. But there's no bitterness as such. It was just part of being there, being in India, being in Pakistan, and living and surviving. So that may be a reason why I have got no animosity towards all these people who are at the moment being agitated by the politician for the political gain. And the same thing is happening in Australia now. So I still don't get agitated as such. But yes, these are tough times in terms of tolerance and absence of love.
I really wanted to ask you about how you moved to Australia, but we can ask that a bit later,
Right?
because I'm really intrigued how, as you said, you don't have any feelings or of hatred or towards people who, if I say, okay, you had to move your house, you had where generations would have lived.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? Like, at what point did you start thinking? It may not be what point. Gradually, how did you train yourself or started thinking about positivity, or why and how those things happen?
I think it's a lot to do with, you know, the obstacles in life always. And you can either spend your whole life fighting them and not finding an alternate way. And the philosophy which I usually follow these days is, if you can't change things, why worry about them? Just find another way. Go move around it. Move around the obstacle. Go to the other side and keep on going. And that's what I did. But in those days, in 1950s, going back, I really had no consciousness of that level that I would decide move around the obstacle and not to me. I was secure in India. We moved to Pakistan. My family was still loving me. We were very secure in the absence of things. We were secure as a family. And to me, India was just a phase which has passed, and it didn't bother us as such. So it's not that sort of thinking in 1950 or 60s which I have now. So in that case, I can say that, look, the things which you can't change, you just go around them. You don't have to worry about them. You don't have to fret about them as such. So this is what my now philosophy is. Obstacles, yes, no problem.
Great. So at what point did you decide, or how did you end up in Australia?
Oh, I finished my master's in geology, and the only place where there were a lot of geologists needed was Australia and Canada in those days, because none of this mineral boom had happened. They were short of geologists. They couldn't get it from the mother country. So they would go for geologists from anywhere in the world. And I finished my degree in Pakistan, and I was doing a sales job for 2 years. Nothing to do with geology. So in the end, I decided I'll migrate to Australia. So you can call me an economic migrant, I suppose. That will be right. I just moved from Australia to Pakistan. I had a motorbike which I sold to get the airfare to Australia. And airfare was cheap in those days, about $250 in those days, from Pakistan to Sydney. And I knew a distant relative who had married in Australia when he had come to Australia for his education. So I had that address. But at the same time, I had two job offers because being a geologist and they were in demand. So the job offers were there. Immigration took 6 months. They rejected my application once. I appealed against it. I got it on the second go. They didn't offer me the £10 migration because, according to the interpretation, that was only for the British migrants, not for anywhere else migrant.
So you migrated way before Australia had the new policies about welcoming migrants from everywhere else. That's where in early 70s when the white migration.
I think the white migration policy, white Australia policy was abolished in 1969. And I was in the second year of migrants who came. So, but some of the facilities which were for migrants who were on the skill list was only for the white migrants, not for the other migrants. So I came paying my own fare here. And of course, that was the beginning of getting migrants from Asia. The White Australia policy abolition was basically to allow Asians to come in. Before that, the Turks, the Yugoslavians, the Egyptians, Lebanese, they were allowed to come in because of the skin color. But the Asian one started in 1969. That was the first batch. I came in 1970. So I was the second year. Okay. And that's since when I came here, I mean, being in the second batch, it was, I think, nearly 6 months before I saw another person from Pakistan in the street.
Quite different to when I came.
You'd go to Coles and there'll be none of these Asian spices, none of the Asian vegetables, none of the Asian things like yogurt, for example. You couldn't buy yogurt in Australia. You can buy butter and lard, but not cream. All these sort of things came in with this migration business, which brought a lot of food. And of course, the dinner in a restaurant. You go to a restaurant, you can have fancy restaurant, you can have a steak, and of course there'll be 3 vegetables with it. And if you are going cheap as a student, I suppose, then you'll go for sausages and 3 vegetables. And that was the difference between the standard of living of the ordinary people, sausages and delicatessen meat or real steak sort of thing. And that was it. So, I mean, it was 2 years before I even had my first cup of tea, because the tea which was sold here was too bland, I should say. It
Just
wasn't
the tea bag?
No, the tea bags were not there. Tea bags are not there. It has to be tea which was brewed. But the tea itself was very light tea, because what the Australians were drinking at that time was very watered down tea with milk in it. And I didn't like it, so I started drinking coffee.
I want to talk about so many philosophical things with you, but my mind is actually stuck on tea. I really thought Britishers gave us that one gift to Southeast Asia, tea.
No, the Britishers didn't give you that one of tea. I can give you stories about the tea was an export business for them. The East India Company, I mean, they raised gardens and they raised forest to grow tea in Assam. It was an export commodity. They didn't give us tea. But when the demand of tea rose and India couldn't supply it, they started planting tea plantations in Kenya and Africa. And that supply, being closer to Britain, I should say, they could supply them cheaper than from India. That's where the same sort of strategy happened here, which happened in Hong Kong, but I'll come back to Hong Kong later. They couldn't export the tea, so what they said, well, look, we have got masses of Indians here. They never drink tea. Let's make them drink tea. And my mother would tell me that at every street corner, they would have a man with samovar, boiling tea in it, and give free tea to everybody who takes an offer. And that's how the Indian got into the habit of drinking tea. And that tea, they did the same thing in Hong Kong. To export opium, they made sure that the Hong Kong people became addicted to it. And the same thing Taliban did in Afghanistan, that when they couldn't export all the opium grown in Afghanistan, they exported to Pakistan, where the local population became addicted. So it's just a business model. They didn't give us anything for out of the heart.
Oh, so that business model is still
It's still
working
working.
in
It
the
still works.
world in
You
one of the
create
worst forms
you
possible.
you create a demand, and then you can sell what you're selling. That's how it works.
Coming from the Southeast Asia, I can imagine at that time not many people knew what the life would be like here for you. Was it easier to convince your parents and siblings and everyone what you're doing?
As I said, it was more like a case of economic migrants. There was a need to go, move out, and go in the world and do something, and that's what it is. But yes, I can agree. There was nobody in my near relations or around me have been to Australia, so Australia was an unknown quantity. Canada, yes. America, yes. Britain, yes. So I could have chosen those three countries, but I rejected them because of the climate. I said Australia is nice and warm, and this was one thing which weighed heavily in favor of Australia as compared to Canada. Both countries need geologists, but Canada is 9 months of winter. Australia is 9 months of summer. So I decided to come here. Convincing parent wasn't difficult. And you know what happens is the parents see the need of it. They can't help you with settling you down in monetary terms or job terms. So they said, well, go, but come back when you're ready to come back. And I said, all right. So from that time onward, every 2 years, I very faithfully went back to Pakistan when my parents were alive, even with the kids. Um, but I never thought of settling back in Pakistan. I came here sort of, this is it, and that's it. I mean, it was the same with my father. He came from India, he settled in Pakistan, he never went back. He said, well, what's the point of going back? History doesn't repeat itself, not in the same context.
So, once you arrived here as an economic migrant, and as you were in the second wave of the Asian migration, apart from the normal food related challenges and what happens when you don't see anyone of the same skin color, did you face any other challenges?
Well, I think the reason for this, I didn't think that as a challenge, because the day I landed at 6, like the usual time, 6 a.m. in Sydney. 7 o'clock, I was picked up by that relations of mine. In fact, my relative wasn't there. His mother-in-law, his brother-in-law, and his sister-in-law were there at the airport to pick me up.
Oh,
They picked me up and they took me to North Sydney boarding house, where I had booked a room for a week and paid for it. And they dropped me there, and then they asked me to come back to their house in the evening, which I did. So it was very comfortable settling in. I came to an airport with not a known face, but a friendly faces. And they took me home in the evening. I had dinner with them. So, and the next day, I had the job. I rang the people who had given me the offer of jobs. The first one wasn't available anymore because it took so long to come. The second one said, well, can you start Monday? And I said, yes. So on Monday, they picked me up from the hotel, and the job was in Orange, in New South Wales. So the second day, I moved to Orange, and I lived in pubs for next 2 years when I was working as a geologist. So I was living in a country pub for 2 years, and of course, there were no people of Asian origin. And of course, in the pubs, there are no blacks living either, no Aboriginals living there. But yes, I met them in their surroundings, like when I went to a station and I had to do some geology. There were people around here, the stockmen and those sort of people who were Aboriginal people. So I mean, I miss my home more than I missed anybody else in the street, sort of thing. But I always had that sort of feeling that, look, this is a different country, and I'll settle in. And I did settle in without any trouble as such. There was no anxiety as such. As long as I had that job there for 2 years, I had no anxiety, and no reason to worry about that I don't see my countrymen. And of course, the things which kept me sane all the time are the books, which I read then and I still read them. And you can move back while living in Orange or Morlong or Dubbo or Wellington pub. All those little towns where I stayed in pubs, people will be drinking all night till 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. And after dinner, I'll go back to my room and read a book. That's it. I never worried about what's happening downstairs. I never went downstairs in the pubs to drink as such, even though some of my colleagues were drinking downstairs. I never drank, so it wasn't a problem for me.
Yeah, that's one thing, because you came to a country where not just the skin color of people was different, but the whole culture, the religion, everything was different. You did you feel any sort of restrictions that arrived from your religion or your practices or people's understanding of it at that time?
Look, the couple of things. I was a novelty, let's put it this way, in those days. People had never seen an Asian in Orange or Molong or Wellington or Dubbo. To them, I was not an Aboriginal, and here I was a black person or brown person, you can call it whatever you call it, different person, having a job for which he is qualified and they aren't. So there was nothing as such. I mean, it was mainly a novelty. They would come and ask me question, where are you from? Because they never met anybody in those days in 1970. And there was only one station which I remember in between Orange and Wellington, where the owners didn't allow me to enter his property, saying he doesn't want anybody who's not white in his property. So
70s.
in 1970, there was only one. So I mean, I can't call that a sample, even because it's such a minuscule thing. So my company, which was an American exploration company, said, no problem, we'll send you a white geologist. And that my colleague went in there and he did the survey, and there was no problem after that. But to me, I think it's at that time, the white people, they had no animosity as such, which you sometimes see here with the racist mob. And the Aboriginal people were not uncomfortable, but they could not place me. They were more puzzled than anything. They could not place me. Where do I put this person here who's from Pakistan? Is he black or is he white? And I think that dilemma I faced again in 1980s, 70s. No, sorry, 80s, when I went to Northern Territory and lived in a Aboriginal community. So to me, that problem, which I never faced it as such. It was never a question of me. In terms of religion practice, I could practice whatever I like. There was no mosque, no problem. You don't need to have a mosque to be a Muslim. I could fast. I could eat whatever I like, but I didn't eat what was not allowed by my religion. I didn't drink, living in a pub for 2 years, smelling alcohol all day. No problem. But to me, there was no restriction on such. It was a free country. And I think that was one aspect of being away from home and enjoying this total freedom of what you can do and decide what not to do. That was good.